Hello, welcome to On Point. I'm Amezcua. Millions around the world are being forced to move from their homes to look for a better life wherever they can find it. And for many, the United States is their chosen destination. A Pew Research study found that more than 1 million immigrants arrive in the United States each year, and all of them have their own stories. Immigrants account for less than 14% of the U.S. population, but they are at the center of one of today's major political debates. Pew found that 65% of Americans say immigrants strengthen the country through their hard work and talent. President Trump recently tweeted a threat to send armed soldiers to the border. He says Mexican soldiers recently pulled guns on National Guard soldiers in a diversionary tactic for drug smugglers on the border. He says Mexico is not doing enough in apprehending and returning. Trump has also reportedly been saying that Central American countries are sending their worst to the border. Murderous migrants, he reportedly called them. Journalist and writer Todd Miller says many of those migrants are fleeing countries that are facing economic hardships.
There's so many different factors going on. There's so many people that are talking about not being able to make ends meet and economic deprivation, and that really corroborates with sort of like there's 60% poverty level in Guatemala, 60% in Honduras, and then if you get into rural areas, it even goes higher, maybe even 70, 80%.
On Point Carissa Preciado has more on the story.
Thank you, Henry. On today's show, we have private attorney Nathan Osorio, and we have professor and chair of Central American Studies Douglas Carranza and immigration attorney Raul Godinez. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, first question. What is happening in Central America that is causing many of them to come to the United States? We'll start with Nathan.
Well, I think it's just really an escalation of things that have been happening for a while now. A lot of fear, a rise in crime, poverty, things that are just, not new necessarily for the area, but just people are getting more and more afraid. And I think also perhaps an image, or I think it's also an abuse of maybe selling people on the idea that they can come here and find help here when clearly our administration is not on that page. So I think it's both fear and also false hopes.
Do you want to add something?
This migration massively, the way it's happening right now, it started in the 1980s because of the civil wars in Central America. It has to do also with U.S. foreign policy, not just in political terms, but also in the way developmental policies are implemented in Central America that don't match with the reality of what the people needs. Then you have this massive disagreement when you implement a developmental policy with the realities of countries that are starting to emerge from years of military dictatorships, and this is not new. We are seeing on the news because it's there, but this thing had been happening for more than 40 years.
Raul, you want to add something?
Of course, I think I agree with Douglas's last point. This is not something new, but I think with this administration's focus on border control, there's more attention, publicity to that issue. But I don't think people are completely naive. I think people see hope. I think people realize how dangerous the journey is, but they have to come with some hope. And I think people, if you were to tell them there's a 1 in 100 chance that you might even get into the country, people are going to take that risk. And I think that's just a reflection of the dire situation in the countries.
Why do Central Americans still desire to come to the United States, despite the policies that President Trump has been saying and has implemented to try to keep them out of this country? We'll start with Douglas.
Well, that hope, looking for new options for the family. When you have a family, when you have kids that you want to send to school and you don't have those opportunities, you will take that risk in the same way many people took that risk of joining an armed struggle in the 1980s because there is no way that they were going to be able to survive then they knew that they had to take a risk. And even if people are telling them how dangerous it is, they will come. They will adopt different strategies, but the reality is that they are looking for better options for your family, for yourself.
Nathan, do you have something to add on to that?
Well, I think a lot of people see it as a certain either victimization or death or abuse and possibilities over here. So, you know, they choose possibilities over what they think is a certainty.
Wow.
And I think finally, I don't think people understand the traumatic experience incarceration will cause. I think when we start to discuss and we see the impacts, it's something new we haven't seen because of the draconian policies that are being adopted. And I think that future harm is being underrated by everyone.
Got it. What countries are many of these immigrants fleeing from? What are some of the reasons why families or individuals migrate to this country? We'll start with Raul.
Well, I think you have, as some stations refer to, the 3 Mexican countries, and those would be the Central American independent countries. And I think you do have significant numbers in Mexico. I think percentage-wise, you might have a higher percentage of the population coming from Central American countries just because Mexico is so vast. And I think from Mexico, we may not be seen as much because when someone's detained at the border from Mexico, they can just be returned immediately to Mexico. So it would be the Central American countries, the ones who are involved and have had the troubles, and now recently the more difficult problems they're having with their political systems.
Douglas?
Fundamentally, it's what they refer to those countries that are part of the Northern Triangle. That would be Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. But they have different reasons. The population don't have the same reasons. We have different political structures in place. Some of them are more inclined to be very conservative, such as the case of Guatemala and Honduras. But in the case of El Salvador, you will have a more so-called leftist government, but the reality is that you have violence in different expressions. Also racism, such as the case of Guatemala and southern Mexico against the indigenous Mayan population, or the racism expressed towards Garifuna people in northern Honduras that are descendants of Afro-Arawak communities in the Caribbean who live in those areas, but they are being pushed around by policies, developmental policies again, that are pushing them out of or displace them from their places of living.
Okay. Nathan, do you want to add something to that?
No, I think they covered that very well.
Okay. What is the political climate in Central America right now that's, bringing all of them to the southern border? We'll start with Nathan.
That's kind of out of my field, I guess I would say. Politically, I mean, my clients, they don't really talk about the politics of, if they're talking about politically, it's just that they were victimized by a local leader or a mayor or something like that. So I wouldn't necessarily know why they disagreed with them, but I just know that they're being targeted because of whatever disagreement they have. So maybe they have more knowledge on the political.
Politically, strictly speaking, in the way we talk about it in the 1980s, it's not there. But look at the case of Nicaragua recently. I mean, you have a government that is being under surveillance by the U.S. government because it's not democratic. Then you have an uprising of the population, and for political reasons, in the case of Nicaragua, that is becoming more and more susceptible to this massive movement of people either to the U.S. or going to Costa Rica. But the same case, we can talk about Honduras or Guatemala. There are political things involved, but not as bold as in the 1980s, because we are dealing with, as Nathan was saying, their argument is not political in the case of the person that he knows, but mostly related to violence, and that is, but it has some political entanglements too.
Raul, were you want to add something?
I think the one thing we also need to look at is the corruption. Mm-hmm. You have the authority figures who are probably inadequately funded, inadequately trained, and as a result or as a consequence, they are susceptible to corruption, whereas they ignore certain violence towards individuals, or they may participate against certain individuals. So I think when you have that lack of infrastructure, and when you have criminal organizations, the maras, taking over that power and assuming what they could be looked at as a quasi-government role in certain areas, I think that is the type of the lack of leadership. And then, Douglas, I suppose one of the things we can look at is how many of the former Salvadoran presidents have been accused of corruption.
Yeah.
So it's not something that's just local, it's something that starts at the top and permeates down.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. What kind of migrant groups are being seen coming to the U.S.-Mexican border? Are we seeing more unaccompanied minors, family units, or a mixture of men and women with children? We'll start with Douglas.
I will say that it's a mixture. Obviously, the most prominent figures that we see, or on the news at least, we see the problem with minors. And that is because, as Raul was mentioning, the conditions of the detention centers where they are being placed is something that we cannot even grasp. The level of violation of human rights that is happening for these kids. But in the last, according to the Mexican government statistics, in the last 3 months, 300,000 people have been moving through Mexico. Then how many arrived to the border? We don't know. There is an uncertain number of people. We don't know exactly the number of women and children. We know the ones that are being captured. That will be the case, but precisely we don't know. What we know is that it's a massive migration, and families are being disrupted because of that.
Raul?
I think we also have to be careful when we talk about what are the demographics. Statistics can be manipulated to suit everyone's different needs, and they can pick different information. So I think, as Douglas said, you see different things, but is it really 300,000, or is it 100,000 being caught 3 times? Mm-hmm. So when it comes to dealing with statistics, I'm always taking every statistics I hear with a grain of salt, just because of the possibility of manipulation.
Nathan?
It's like they said, it's a mix. And how many are repeat violators, whether they're repeat at the U.S. border or in Mexico, that's hard to say, but I definitely see a variety. Some maybe unaccompanied minors but have family here, or just come alone as teenagers, women, adult men, it's a variety.
Okay. Are families still being separated? What's the rule?
Yes, I think initially one of the things the government, for better or for worse, wants to identify that whether or not you're really traveling with a relative under the auspice to prevent abuse. But as a consequence, you are causing the hardship of the separation.
Douglas?
That is clearly, the separation of families is one of the biggest problems that we have, not only for those people that are migrating and are confronting the new laws that are being put in place, but also by other programs that were set to protect families, such as the case of the TPS, where you will see the temporary protected status that has created a problem now for families who have been living here for 20-something years, and they cannot be reunited with their families back in the countries of origin. We thought that we were moving towards something more humane, but it's not happening. The separation clearly creates a problem for these communities, and the current administration is pressing on that in order to maintain, according to them, control over the migratory issue.
And Nathan, would you want to add something to that?
No, I think they covered it pretty well.
Okay. Many migrants say there's not enough work or food in their countries. Based on your findings, do you believe that climate change is a contributing factor to the amount of migrants fleeing their native countries, since many of them depend on agriculture? We'll start with Nathan.
I mean, I think it is a contributing factor. I would say it's not something my clients would point out as the issue. I think, as Raul was saying earlier, it's about corruption. Whether their land is seized by criminal activity and they can't grow their food anymore, or their stores are destroyed or taken over. So I can easily see that it is a factor, but it's not something, my clients come and tell me, the oceans are warming, I can't grow food.
Douglas?
I think Nathan is right in the sense that his clients don't talk about it, the people who visit his office. And it is because for so many years, after the civil wars ended in Central America, a neoliberal program was implemented through developmental policies that eliminated agriculture, eliminated other ways of living, and now you have what they call la maquilas, where you employ women and men to work in these factories to produce shirts, to produce pants, to produce all those things that we need here, that we consume here in these societies, but they were forced to abandon their ways of living. That was agriculture. Now they are living as workers. Then when they are starting to demand better wages, what the companies do is they just move to another country. Then we face a big, big problem. Obviously it's causing environmental problems, because these companies go and put in place companies that do not respect environmental laws. And it's a mixture of problems that have created a massive displacement for the Central American population.
Raul?
I don't think these Central American countries have the luxury of worrying about climate change. As Douglas is pointing out, there are other environmental issues that are destroying their livelihood. So these people are still dealing with basic human necessities. Am I going to get killed if my son goes to school and I walk him to school? Am I going to have food to put on the table? Am I going to have a job? So I think there's other factors that are so significant that climate change for them is not, unfortunately, something that they even think about.
Okay. What are some stories that immigrants have told you about their experience? We'll start with Raul.
There are numerous ones, hundreds of them, but I think what most strikes is when someone can't tell you the experience because they're so overwhelmed with the pain that they've gone to that they can't even talk about it without crying. And I think that's what speaks volumes. And the troubles, the harm that they've suffered on the road, what's happened to them, and specifically with minor kids and the sex abuse stories you hear and the violence, no one's immune for that. I think I've heard just comparable amount from men who have been sexually abused as women. And I think that's what stands out, and what makes it worse is the stories you can't hear because the person's too overwhelmed to tell you.
Nathan?
Raul's right. I mean, it's, we hear a variety of reasons why they left, from directly impacting themselves or their children or a cousin or something like that. But it can take weeks or a lot of pushing months to really get the full details of it. A lot of times they'll only give you a little bit, and then once they feel more comfortable or can process it more, they'll give you a little more.
Douglas, would you want to add something to that?
No, but I would like to revisit the previous question, just to incorporate that element of they are not concerned for the environment when they come and testify about what they left. But back in the countries of origin, they are working towards a better environment for them. One of the biggest problems that we have is the access to water. In the Salvadorian case, we have one of the most contaminated waters for drinkable waters that are killing people, or killing people because they are acquiring some kind of disease for not drinking the proper amounts of water or drinkable water, but also because they organize themselves as a defenders of their space. Then the mining companies who want to use that water, or other companies, will come and push them to the limit, such as the case of Honduras in those humongous dams that are building to produce electricity are displacing people. Then environmental conditions are important. Now, when you come here, obviously that is not something that they will discuss, because they are being persecuted violently, and that is what they will testify, because the situation will create a more complex explanation.
And I apologize if I don't want to minimize the environmental concern. I just don't think the environmental concern is as much caused by global warming as it is by corporate greed and the other factors that are affecting them. So the environment is definitely an issue. I just don't think it's as significant as global warming.
Got it.
I'd like to say something about your last question about what stories we've heard. We were very vague for the purposes that we've heard terrible things. I mean, I think in his practice we hear rape, murder, shootings, kidnappings. One current client of mine family member was from Mexico, cut up, separated into bags. It's not something I think we would just discuss openly, but it's the ones that you can't get out are particularly terrifying, And when they do appear, even we're shocked at some of the things that we hear.
Okay. What can they expect when migrants get to the United States? We'll start with Nathan.
Well, now they can expect to maybe not even be let in. I mean, to be told to wait in a line that doesn't exist, for a date that won't come. I'm here locally, so by the time clients get to me, they've made it through the patchwork and hell of being processed by immigration. So once they get here, inside with either family or friends, a lot of them have bracelets on. They have monthly check-ins, either going to the house, going to appointments, waiting for a court date, and not being allowed to work until they're here for a certain amount of time. So struggling, to try to make ends meet while they're waiting for a date that the court systems are just backlogged to handle. So they trade one, struggle for another.
Raul?
Sad to say, I think they're coming to a country that was founded on due process and rights, and at this very point in time, they're being threatened. So the amount of access they have to judges, to due process, to the right of just being free while a case is being pending, I think that is what they're coming to face, a country that's not really living up to the due process that it was founded on.
Douglas?
We say that they encountered a narrative of hate, of racism and discrimination that is expressed in what they mentioned. a narrative that must be changed, it seems to me, because our country here was founded in different principle, or at least evolving towards a more, society that will include everyone instead of reacting. But now we have a narrative of hate that has been elevated and that has ramification in every aspect of our society. And that is something that migrants are encountering in their daily life.
Okay. What legal advice is recommended to those seeking asylum? We'll start with Raul.
I think they need to realize that they need to review their matter first with an attorney who's knowledgeable, who can understand and explain to them what the process is. Because many a times, people don't understand that for political asylum, it's not enough that your life is in danger, that you're going to be killed, raped, beaten, left on the curb, but the reason why your life is in danger has to be related by something that's recognized by the United States government. Political opinion, race, nationality, religion, or one that's always in flux is membership in a particular social group. So I think being able to present and articulate someone who's gone through a traumatic experience, I think just learning how to express yourself is something that they should be wary of.
Nathan?
I think Raul said it, appropriately. Asylum's hard, so legal advice would be seek an experienced immigration attorney. But when you're talking about just the process, asylum is difficult because fear is not enough. It's never designed that way, it never was. So, I think maybe personal advice is that learning that they need to communicate and talk about things they might not want to, or might not matter. Communication is key, and especially in cases with particular social group, which I think a lot of, I know most of my Central American clients hinge on that, because politics, like we talked about earlier, is not, that they don't necessarily, very vocal in their political opinion, but they're tough, so they need to understand that.
Douglas?
I think they responded.
So that's all that we have for today. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on social media at CSUN On Point. You can hear us on KCSN 88.5 FM on Sunday mornings at 5:30. You can watch us on Santa Clarita Valley Television on Sunday afternoons at 5 and on LA 36 at 8 on Thursday evenings. For all of us here on Point, I'm Henry Amezcua.